Your Nvidia control panel settings are probably wrong. So today I'm going to give you a definitive in-depth breakdown of all of the best Nvidia control panel settings for maximum performance and visuals in literally any PC game. First thing to do is open up the Nvidia control panel. You can do it from the desktop, just right click anywhere, then select it from the menu that opens. We're going to start in this first area, adjust image settings with preview. All you need to do here is make sure you've got the use the advanced 3D image settings option set. If you select either of these other things, it's not going to use any of the settings we dial in here, so this whole video will be completely pointless. So make sure you've got that set there. Now, because you're watching this video, guys, I can only assume that you've already built the ultimate PC gaming setup. You know, a killer graphics card, lightning fast monitor, custom mechanical keyboard, but there's one thing that could still be holding you back. Your connection. Most gamers don't realize this, but the route that your data takes to reach the game server matters just as much as your FPS, if not more. If that route isn't optimized, then your performance takes a hit, and that is where exit lag comes in, who are kindly supporting today's video. Let me make this clear. This is not a luxury. It is a core part of a complete gaming setup. Exit lag uses an advanced AI to automatically route your connection along the fastest, most stable path, reducing ping, eliminating packet loss, and keeping your gameplay as smooth as possible. Doesn't really matter what you're playing because it's built to support over 2,000 games with optimized servers all over the world. And even better, it works both on PC and mobile. Getting started with it takes literally a couple of clicks. You just download the latest version, log in, select your game, and you're done. No tweaking, no technical skills needed. It just works. Before I was contacted by these guys, I had tried all sorts of things to improve my connection, different ISPs, messing around with my router settings, in-game settings. Nothing delivered like exit lag did in just a couple of minutes. The difference is real. My ping dropped, my gameplay stabilized, and it stayed consistent match after match. And there has never been a better time to try it out because I've got a deal for you viewers that you are not going to want to miss. Using my link in the description below or the QR code on screen, you can grab yourself the annual plan right now for 50% off. And on top of that, you'll unlock 3 30-day keys to share with your squad. That's 90 days of exit lag completely for free. Look, guys, if you've got a serious setup, then you need to be serious about your connection. So try out exit lag using the link in the description below today and make sure that nothing is holding you back. Anyway, back to the video. This video is just going to focus on the global settings that are going to be useful for literally any game you play and will apply to any game you play. The first setting in here is image scaling, which enables you to run a game at a slightly lower resolution and then use sharpening to make the game look less blurry and overall provide an FPS boost. However, I recommend that you don't use this. There are much better upscaling settings we now have, things like DLSS, things like FSR built into games. Instead, I'm going to show you how you can replace the image scaling option in here with an image sharpening option that can make pretty much any game look better. Here's how you do it. First thing you need to do, close the Nvidia control panel. Next, come down to your search bar and search for regedit, which is the registry editor. You then need to go to this folder path, which I've pasted up here. You can copy and paste that from in my description below. Press enter and you'll have a ton of options in here that are enable GR and then some numbers. The one we care about is enable GR535. What you're gonna do is double click and you're gonna change the value data in here from 1 to 0. Click OK. You don't need to save anything. You can then just close regedit, right click again, open up the Nvidia control panel, and when we head back to the manage 3D settings area, you will see we now have image sharpening. What I'd recommend you do globally is come in here and turn this on, set it to, I like around 0.7 and leave ignore film grain to 0.17. This is a really nice, pretty much performance-free sharpening boost to any game. If you don't like it in a specific game, you can come into the program settings and you can set it to off for that game specifically. But globally, leave it on. Next up, we've got ambient occlusion. By default, this is set to off. You can also set this to performance or quality in here. What it doesn't explain is that having this set to off is essentially like these application controlled settings. Basically, if you turn on ambient occlusion in a game and you've got this set to off, you will get ambient occlusion. This doesn't overwrite that. The recommendation here is that you just leave this to off and let the application control all the ambient occlusion as it wants to. Turning it to performance or quality and forcing it in here will almost certainly lead to worse quality shadows in games, so just keep it off. Anisotropic filtering is all to do with how our textures look. If you're looking directly at an object head-on, the texture will be pretty much dependent on what your texture setting is set to in-game, but if you're looking at an object from a slightly different angle, anisotropic filtering kicks in and gives you much better, crispier looking textures. You can turn this all the way up, and I highly recommend you would, turning this up to 16x from in here and forcing that across all your games. It causes no performance dip, and in almost all circumstances will give you better looking textures inside of your games. If you're in certain specific games that don't support anisotropic filtering by default, then you might end up seeing some weird shimmering on objects. I remember Minecraft had this issue. If that's the case, once again, you can go to the program settings and just turn off anisotropic filtering in here for that specific game. Moving on, we've got FXAA, a method of anti-aliasing which you can force on from inside of the Nvidia control panel. You definitely don't want to do this though. FXAA is probably the worst anti-aliasing method that you can select. Turning this on and forcing FXAA will naturally lead to much blurrier anti-aliasing, and no one wants that, so keep it off. Sticking with anti-aliasing, we've then got gamma correction, which by default is on. You actually want to turn this off. The reason being, this is kind of similar to ambient occlusion, where off actually means application controlled. Gamma correction for anti-aliasing is naturally built into most modern day games, and you want the game itself, the rendering engine of the game, to be handling that, not your Nvidia control panel. Speaking of anti-aliasing modes, you can select them inside of here and override the application setting that you set up. You definitely don't want to do this. You want to leave this to application controlled and let the settings menu inside of the game determine whether you're using SMAA or TAA or some sort of anti-aliasing, not the Nvidia control panel. Anti-aliasing setting is grayed out, so we can't change that anyway, that's fine. Then anti-aliasing transparency, from all the testing I've done and also seen others do, this doesn't do anything. I don't really know why it's still here. Just leave it to off, therefore it won't cause any weird issues down the line. Finally, now moving away from anti-aliasing, we're on to background application max frame rate. What this allows us to do is set a maximum frame rate that the game will run at in the background when we alt-tab out. So if I'm playing a game and then maybe I'm looking at a guide or just doing something on my second monitor, I can alt-tab and it will limit the frame rate. This is actually a really good thing to do, because a lot of games, when you alt-tab out of them, they're still running at crazy frame rate in the background. It tanks your PC, it makes what you're trying to do over on the side much harder to do. It's all kind of laggy and feeling a bit horrid. So come in here, put this on and just set it to 30 FPS, click OK. That way, when I alt tab, my PC isn't lagging. I'm not focused on the game right now. I'm focused on what I'm doing over here. Really important setting that most people don't have enabled. For CUDA GPUs, you should be able to just leave this at all if you've only got one GPU in your system like I do, my 3090. If you have multiple GPUs for whatever reason, then just make sure your most powerful one is the one that's selected in here and the others are not selected. Next up, we've got dynamic super resolution, or DSR factors. There's a big drop down here of a bunch of different resolutions that are scaled up versions of whatever our native resolution is. What I'd recommend you do is come in here and select all of these. I'll explain why in just a sec. Just select the whole list. What this will do is it will actually add a load of new resolutions to your in-game settings that you can select. So whereas previously I would have had a max resolution of 1440p, I will now have, for example, 4K as an option. Obviously, running a game at 4K will make it look even more sharp, but traditionally running at a higher resolution would cost a ton of FPS. But by enabling DSR on all of these resolutions, especially these DL scaling ones, which are deep learning scaling, which is even more efficient, you actually save a ton of FPS. You will still lose a little bit, but you can make certain single player games where you have a bit of breathing room look honestly incredible. Also, if you do choose to run a game at native resolution, this stuff won't do anything anyway, so there's literally no harm in just having them all enabled. DSR smoothness is set at 33%, and honestly, that is a good roundabout value to leave it to, assuming you're using DSR in-game, so just leave it to 33. We've then got low latency mode. This is set to off by default, but you can set it to on or to ultra. I've seen a ton of people chucking this on ultra because they think it's going to give them the lowest latency possible. In theory, it should do, but there's there's been far too many case studies of the ultra setting causing weird problems or stuttering or things like that in a ton of different games. So what I would recommend you do is chuck this to on. You definitely want it on because it does help with latency. It's proven to do so. However, one caveat to this: if the game that you are running allows you to enable a setting called Nvidia Reflex Low Latency, which can be set to off or on plus boost in game, then you want to come to your program settings, and for that specific game, for example, Warzone 2 has this setting, you want to make sure it's set to off low latency mode in the Nvidia control panel settings. The reason for this is that it's kind of like the ones we've said previously, where we want to let the application handle that. If you start enabling it in game as well as in control panel, you can get similar problems that you get from running ultra low latency, which we definitely want to avoid. Next, we can set the max frame rate limit globally for all games on PC. I'd recommend you keep this off in the control panel, however. A lot of games these days, especially the competitive ones, come with a max frame rate setting in the in-game settings. That's always going to give you the best latency using that rather than using a third-party bit of software. So in those circumstances, if you want to have a max frame rate, just use the in-game setting. If not, I would say things like MSI Afterburner with Reaver Tuner, that's going to give you a better overall experience with max frame rate than using the Nvidia control panel for overall latency. Monitor technology is where we can enable G-Sync. It's actually enabled by default. I do have a G-Sync compatible monitor. However, I prefer using fixed refresh. So for most of you people out there, just stick with fixed refresh. And if you want a guide on G-Sync, go and look for that elsewhere. MFAA, or multi-frame sampled AA, is set to off by default, but you definitely need to turn it on. The reason is that this only has an effect when you are using MSAA anti-aliasing, probably the best looking anti-aliasing, inside of a game. In those circumstances, MFAA is applied on top of that, and you get the best looking anti-aliasing you can actually get. If you're playing a game with no MSAA or just another kind of anti-aliasing in general, this just won't do anything. So there's literally no harm to having it on so that it gives you the best looking game in the circumstances I just explained. OpenGL GDI compatibility and OpenGL rendering GPU, you can just leave these both to auto. OpenGL applications are few and far between in the modern day, so in most circumstances this just won't do anything, and in circumstances where it does matter, having these set to auto is just going to be your best bet. Power management mode, this is a very interesting one. We've got normal or prefer maximum performance. Every single guide out there tells you put it on prefer maximum performance so we get the most FPS possible. This actually isn't the case. Putting this to prefer maximum performance simply will just run your GPU at like max clocks and max performance at all times, even when it doesn't need to. Just leaving this to normal will not limit your GPU in any way, and it will also give your GPU that bit of breathing space when it needs to. Just leave this to normal, you will not gain anything from running this setting. Preferred refresh rate, by default it's set to application controlled. I would recommend that you set this to highest available. This will just make sure that whatever the refresh rate of your monitor is, mine is 240 Hertz, you are always achieving that refresh rate and it's not getting switched by the game in any way. The shader cache size determines how much of our PC disk space we are giving games to store shader compiles. Having more stored shader compiles in general will lead to overall a lot less stuttering in games that need it. The annoying thing here is that driver default doesn't actually say how big it is. Driver default could, by all means, be plenty, but because it doesn't tell you how much, I can't in good faith recommend that you keep it at that. For most games, I would recommend between 1 and 5 gig is a good amount. Basically, if it runs out of space, it will just overwrite the oldest stuff in there, which should be fine because that's probably for games that you're not playing anymore anyway. Basically, if you're really struggling for disk space, do 1 gig. If you've got enough disk space, do 5 gig. For my setup, I've got a decent amount of hard drive space, so I'm going to be setting 5 gig. The next thing in here is these 4 texture filtering options. The only one that we actually care about is the quality setting. The reason being, when we select a setting in here, the other 3 settings will change to match what we've set here, if that makes sense. The only 2 you should be choosing between are quality and performance. The high quality and high performance options are just, by all testing, worse. they cause more problems, they look worse, and they don't provide anything better than the default quality and performance settings. If you care more about quality and you care more about overall visuals, maybe you play a lot more single player games and you care more about that, just leave this to quality. That's going to give you the best bet. Instead, if you care a bit more about performance, you play a lot more competitive games, you really care about edging out every opponent, just select performance. The only thing that actually changes in here when you change this setting is this anisotropic sample optimization. You can see when I've got it to performance, it's on. When I change it to quality, it's off. The negative LOD bias remains at clamp and the trilinear optimization remains at on. So pick your poison. I play a lot of competitive games, so I'm going to select performance. Threaded optimization, this is set to auto by default, but you can set it to on or off and force it. It's another setting where we do not want to force this within the NVIDIA control panel. We just want whatever the game is that's running to have the freedom to set it as it needs to. So leave this at auto. Triple buffering, it doesn't actually say in the feature title, but it says below that this is specifically for OpenGL applications. You can turn this on, but it's not going to do much of anything. It's more likely to just cause more issues because, as I mentioned above, there are basically no OpenGL applications in the modern day, especially for PC gamers. So just leave this to off. Vertical sync or V-sync, there's a ton of different options in here that you could have a read through and get lost in, but I'd recommend you just leave it to the default of use 3D application setting. If you want to enable V-sync in-game to help with screen tearing, but in general get worse input latency, so I'd recommend you don't, then just do it inside of the in-game settings. Don't do it within the NVIDIA control panel. Virtual reality pre-rendered frames. This is only going to affect VR games. So for most of you guys who might not play VR games, this isn't going to do anything. You can just leave it at default. But for those of you who do play VR games, 1 is actually the best setting, and that's why it's the default option. So leave that as is. Then variable rate super sampling. You actually want to turn this to adaptive. What this is going to do is that in any VR game that can use variable rate super sampling, it will use it. In games where it can't be used, it won't use it. That's the best setup, so adaptive is the best option. The last setting in this list is Vulkan/OpenGL present method. I said OpenGL, there aren't too many games that utilize it, but Vulkan, there are a bunch of games actually utilizing Vulkan if you do select that rendering option. I would recommend, in global, you leave this to auto. And then what you should do for your specific game, if you're running it in Vulkan as your renderer, look on the subreddit or ask people who play the game and know a lot about the game what the best setting is, and then you can set that inside of the program settings over here at the bottom. That's going to be your best bet. Now that we've done all that, we can click apply at the bottom. There we go. The screen will flicker a bit and then it will lock in all those settings for you. Next, configure surround PhysX. The only thing you need to make sure of in here is that you have your GPU selected. I would recommend that you do this instead of doing auto select, just to ensure that our GPU is being used for PhysX in any circumstances where it is needed. In the change resolution area, you can select whatever resolution you want to run. If you're running like a stretched resolution or something in a specific game like Counter-Strike or in Valorant or something like that. The main thing in here is make sure that your refresh rate is set to the correct one for your monitor. I've got a 240 Hz monitor. It would be a crying shame if I was running at even, 120 or somewhere down at 60. Don't be that guy. Set it in here, make sure it's correct. Inside of adjust desktop color settings, the only thing I would highly recommend you change in here is the digital vibrance. This by default will be set at 50%. For my specific main gaming monitor, I like putting this to around 70. It gives a really nice boost to colors across the board. It can fix decently bad colors that you might get with some of your cheaper monitors in one quick setting change. So try and see what this looks like for yourself. If you don't like it, you can just switch it back to 50. But digital vibrance is a nice little hack for really nice colors. The only other area I'd recommend you look in is the setup G-Sync area. If you don't want G-Sync running on your G-Sync compatible monitor, make sure that it's not ticked in here. If you have it ticked in here and you don't have G-Sync set up properly with a proper frame rate limiter and stuff, you can get some real weird performance inside of games and it will overall just run a bit weird. So make sure sure you've got this disabled if you are not using G-Sync. Now that we've got all these settings locked in, make sure to subscribe to the channel down below to be the first to have access to my new optimization guides as soon as they come out for brand new AAA releases, as well as new seasonal updates for competitive games like Warzone and Apex. You definitely are not going to want to miss it.